Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Casual Criminalist. I, as always, am your host, Simon. Welcome. The depravity of Stephen Port, the grinder killer. Brilliant. We're in for a fun one today, aren't we, guys? This is written by Matt. Thank you, Matt. Always a pleasure. The format of the show, if you're new here, I've never read this before. We're going to read it together, dear audience, and explore. Let's jump in. Grindr, founded in 2009. Grindr is basically Tinder, but for LGBTQ plus something people, right? It's one of the most well-known dating sites in the world and was designed specifically for the LGBT community. Whether you're looking for friends, long-term romantic relationships, or one-night stands, it's a convenient place to look for companionship. Oh, okay, I didn't know it was about looking for friends as well. That's nice. And companionship is exactly what 15 young men in the UK were looking for back in the mid-2010s when they agreed to go on a date with an odd older man who seemed maybe a bit too friendly and ready to party. A man by the name of Stephen Port. I don't know, some people are just friendly and ready to party. Between 2014 and 2015, that pathetic and lonely man sexually assaulted 11 of those men, while the 4 others didn't survive his advances. Worse still, the police had Port in their crosshairs, but disregarded him in favor of an easier suspect, leading to more boys losing their lives. Join us as we dive into the abyss to confront the grinder killer. Odd and quiet. Stephen Port was born in Southend-on-Sea in Essex in the UK on February the 22nd, 1975, and by the time he was a year old, his family had moved to Dagenham in East London. Got a friend who lives in Dagenham. How odd. Information about his home life is scarce at best, and what is known is that Port was very quiet and withdrawn child, being described as a loner by most of the people who knew him. Whether it was at home or at school, he would normally be seen by himself, not saying a word, as if the world around him didn't even exist. There were those at his school who even believed that he was deaf, since he never talked to anyone or acknowledged anyone when they spoke with him. This peculiar behavior led him to being bullied by his peers at school, since we all know children can be quite vindictive to those who seem different. Outside of that, though, Port had a fairly normal childhood. He came from a working-class family, and there were no reports or documentation of any sort that indicated he'd been abused as a child, and even after he came out as gay in his 20s, that didn't seem to cause much, if any, backlash from his folks. Everything seemed right as rain. But, as we know, some people just born monsters. Yeah, this is the worst. Like, even people who commit horrible crimes, it's like, oh, at least their screwed up childhood at least can make some sort of sense in your mind. But it's just like, oh no, he's just straight up bored. An evil son of a bitch. You're like, oh. After Port left school at 16, he eventually got into art college. He was always an artistic sort and used to express his feelings in drawings and paintings. However, he wouldn't stay there long, as it sadly proved too expensive for his parents to continue funding. He didn't seem discouraged by that, though, as he instead switched gears and trained for 2 years to be a chef, which would lead him to working at restaurants for much of his free adult life. You know what that means? That motherfucker is in prison! He even made a brief appearance in Season 9 of Celebrity MasterChef. What's he doing on Celebrity MasterChef? He's not a celebrity. Wait, well, let's carry on. And yet, he still lived with his parents and only moved out when he was in his 30s. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Plenty of people still live with their families as they get older for one reason or another, but perhaps it wasn't so much that Port was totally unwilling to move out on his own, but perhaps that he felt he couldn't. According to his neighbours, Port's temperament remained very childlike, even as an adult. They even saw him playing with children's toys long after he had any business playing with them. Don't let people see my Lego collection. It's substantial. I think I've probably done about, I don't know, it's got to be like close to 100,000 pieces now. It's a lot of Lego. I love making Legos. Apparently I have a childlike temperament. But I'm not like this psycho, don't get any ideas. I just like building with Lego. His temperament and immaturity even led to him being dumped by at least one of his partners. Ryan Edwards was neighbours with Stephen Port, and he confirmed that in normal conversation, Port was very withdrawn and awkward. Quote, he was a very tall man, sort of a towering physical presence. And he actually walked with almost like a bit of a lumber, a stroke lurch. He was very much a man of few words, so when he used to talk to me, he often didn't give eye contact. He would burrow his head and often give 1 or 2 word answers. I think there was something stunted about Stephen's mental development. I remember something a bit peculiar. I was going to host a party. I was putting some rubbish out, and there was a toy truck there, and I thought, Stephen will love that. I was with a friend at the time. They said, you can't give a grown man a toy truck. And I was like, yeah, but from what I know of Stephen, I think he'd really like it. So at the party, I gave him the toy truck, and lo and behold, he was absolutely overjoyed with it. He sat cross-legged on the floor and started pushing the toy truck up and down. He was obviously in his complete own world while the party was going on around him. Well, he seems developmentally, not disabled, what's the right word these days? Stunted development? Arrested development? Like, he's got a mind of at least some of his mind is quite childlike and underdeveloped.
Would a coward have this?
What the hell is that?
These are my words, Mother. From Army.
And so here we have a man, tall as can be, rather quiet with a very childlike demeanor, almost as if he were a kid stuck in a grown man's body with a love of toys. Not the sort that would get many looks from the lads on the streets, and so in an attempt to find his perfect match, Port turned to various LGBTQ+ focused dating sites and apps on the internet. These included sites like Sleepy Boy, Hornet, Fit Lads, Badoo, Gaydar, Flirt, Daddy Hunt, Planet Romeo, Manhunt, Slave Boys, and Couch Surfing. Wait! I don't know any of these except for Couch Surfing. I've never done Couch Surfing. Just to be clear, it's not some gay thing as far as I'm aware. It's a site where you can just list like, oh yeah, I've got a spare room, or I've got a couch. And if you're traveling, you can come sleep on it. And yeah, it's just like a free way for people to stay places. Wait, is there something I missed about couch surfing? I shove and it's like, yeah, I'm here for the couch. And then the person who's like, why are your clothes still on? I'd be like, oh no, what have I done? But the biggest one, of course, was Grindr. And of course, with it being social media and the internet, Paul had no obligation to tell the truth on any of the multiple profiles he created. Whenever someone reached out to him and showed interest, he'd create a whole new persona and take his time to craft the perfect answer to any question they could ask. He told one of his matches that he'd been in the military. He told another that he was a special needs teacher. He told another that he'd graduated from Oxford. He even went so far to never use any current pictures of himself in his profile. He'd always use old pictures, ones taken when he was younger, more fit, and actually had hair instead of the professionally applied toupee that he wore every day to hide his very bald head. What's a professionally applied toupee? Someone who just rests it just right. I want a professionally applied. You mentioned I just rock up one day with a full head of hair that looks awesome because it's professionally applied. Be like, hello. It's back. Each new profile was a new mask, a new disguise for Port to try out in his quest to find the perfect match to complement his fabricated life. I have to say, it does look like he's got real hair. I've got a picture of him. He's not a handsome man, but it does look like he has real hair. And he treated every single match, every single date, as if they were indeed Mr. Right. When going out together, he'd introduce all his dates as his boyfriend, even if it was their first date. Talk about way to drive someone away quickly. That and his clear immaturity and obvious lies, all of which became apparent very fast, proved not to be the best way to keep a man in the long run. And those who did stick around longer than most, they spoke about how Port would abuse them verbally and mentally, making them feel small, and they had no real control in the relationship. That belonged to him. And a lot of the time, that was Port's goal. He couldn't relate to many people his age, so he always went for younger men, preferably in their mid-20s, and those with turbulent lives who could easily be plied with the promise of drugs, which he would provide. But in the end, they always left. His nonsense and abuse got to be too much every time, and so they always rejected him, left him alone with his toys and darker thoughts. And eventually, it got to the point where Port was no longer willing to be rejected, time and time again. Well, let me give you a piece of advice there, Port. Stop being such a fucking weirdo. No one likes a weirdo, Port. Murder and Prejudice. Stephen Port was not a good person, pure and simple. Immaturity and lies were his defining features, and abuse plagued every romantic relationship he tried to have. And because of him, each and every one ended. And every time things would end, it would push him further and further over the edge until he simply snapped. It probably didn't help that he used a range of drugs, including amyl nitrate, poppers, Viagra, mephedrone, crystal methamphetamine and GHB or GLB in its liquid form. Holy shit, I feel like I know about drugs, and I've never heard of amyl nitrate, or I must have because I've heard of poppers. Viagra, obviously no. Methadone. Is that like a misspelling of methadone? It can't be. Crystal methamphetamine, that's just crystal meth. And GHB is the date drug. GBL. Isn't that speaker company? Or is that JBL? GHB is a hell of a drug, and Port knew how to use its effects to his advantage. Yeah, it's the date drug. Date R-word drug. For context, gamma-hydroxybutyric acid, or GHB, is a naturally occurring neurotransmitter and a depressant drug. It directly targets the central nervous system and is known for causing a euphoric effect, though it can lead to heavy drowsiness and even impairment of memory. It has been used recreationally on the party scene, putting those who take it directly on cloud nine. But it's also extremely risky. Not only is it addictive, but it doesn't take much to overdose, which can lead to unconsciousness, slowed breathing, seizures, and even death. And with it being colorless, odorless, and tasteless, it has unfortunately become popular as a date R-word drug, which Port quickly put to use. I mean, there's what's wrong with MDMA? If you're looking to do something recreationally, that certainly provides you a lot of euphoria, and I don't think you can easily overdose on it. Don't know if I've ever heard of anyone overdosing on ecstasy. People probably tell me in the comments, what the fuck are you talking about, Simon? I'm not a drug expert, but it does seem like, I don't know, a drug that you don't hear about the dangers so much as, GHB, which can kill you. Filled with rage and sorrow from his multiple rejections and desperate for love and affection, at least 11 young men were drugged and sexually violated between 2011 and 2015, all at Stephen Port's hands. It's unknown how many of his victims actually went to the police about their violation, but given the fact that he wasn't arrested and there isn't much on the 11 cases we do know about, it doesn't seem that the police took their claims of abuse seriously. Assumedly, their names have never been released because they don't wish for their information to be out in the world. They wish for it to be kept private, which I both understand and respect. Unfortunately, Stephen Port has a victim count of 15 to his name, and 4 of them were not able to walk away after he crossed paths with them. 23-year-old Anthony Walgate was a local fashion student who was taking classes at a university in London. Originally from Yorkshire, he was described by his family as a shy and caring boy with a notable dry wit, as well as totally being devoted to his family. Being both gay and a lover of fashion, when the opportunity arose to study in London, he jumped at the chance, despite his parents' misgivings. They wanted him to stay local, somewhere they could visit easily, somewhere they knew was safe. But Anthony was determined to leave home. He loved fashion and wanted to be famous someday. He wanted to see his name in lights, and he felt London was the only place to do it. Yeah, and I imagine London's a lot more cosmopolitan than Yorkshire. According to his mother, Sarah Sack, while initially hesitant about her baby boy living so far away, being in the big city seemed really good for her son. It helped him grow his confidence and really come out of his shell since he was finally able to truly be who he wanted to be. Yeah, there's something to be said about just, picking up and moving to a new city, especially if you're, not embracing a new identity, but embracing your identity. I think, moving to a new place, especially somewhere cosmopolitan, it seems to be a fantastic idea. The longer Anthony was in London, I could see the signet becoming the swan. He seemed to blossom and find who he really was, and he could dress and act however he wanted. He loved London, his friends, and the life he had there. However, with that growing confidence came the bold decision to get a part-time job as an escort. Risky business. If anything, it enabled him to meet and talk to men of all sorts. And it was on one of these jobs that things would go terribly wrong. On June the 15th, 2014, Anthony was contacted by a new client called Stephen Port. Through the escort website Anthony worked for. Wait, that's a thing? That's allowed? Isn't that like pimping? Wait, I think prostitution as a whole, sex work as a whole is illegal in the UK, right? Even if you're not being pimped. But that sounds really illegal. Port offered him £800 to meet up and spend the night in his flat. Seeing it as easy money, Anthony agreed right away, and they agreed to meet up 2 days later. Just to be safe, though, Anthony made sure to text several of his friends and filled them in on the arrangement just in case things went sideways. So what's the point of the website? Are they doing anything for you? They're not even protecting you? So not only, allegedly, not only are they pimping, but also they're not doing a very good job at it. I don't know enough about this world, so I'm probably getting some things wrong. On June the 17th, I'm probably getting everything wrong. Comments will be like, Simon, you're ignorant again. I'll be like, I'm trying. On June the 17th, Anthony arrived at 47 Cook Street and was let into the apartment by the eagerly awaiting Port. Once they were inside, Port wasted no time at all and proceeded to give Anthony a dose of GHB. Why? He's there to do what you're paid for, no? After Anthony passed out, Port proceeded to sexually assault him over and over while he faded in and out of consciousness. However, whether it was intentional or not, the dose of GHB that Port had given to Anthony had, in the end, been a fatal one. Oh no, I didn't expect this guy to die. I don't know why, I just assumed there were only 4 out of 15. And soon enough, Anthony's eyes closed for the final time, while he continued to be violated and humiliated by the beast who did this to him. Perhaps Port had gotten the dose wrong. Perhaps he never intended to kill Anthony. But what was done, and Port had now officially taken the life of another human being. Port left Anthony's body in his flat for most of the night, and in the wee hours of early June the 18th, he dragged Anthony's body out of the front entrance, propped him in a seated position next to a wall by the front door, placed a bottle of GHB beside him to make it look like he'd taken it himself, and then went back upstairs to phone the authorities. 999. Ambulance, what's the address of the emergency? Port. Cook Street. There's a young boy. Looks like he's collapsed outside. Outside of which number? 4758, I think. What area? Barking. 47 Cook Street? Yes. Looks like he collapsed or had a seizure or something, or he's just drunk. When the police arrived, they cordoned off the scene right away. And at 8 a.m. that morning, Anthony was officially pronounced dead. But recognizing the fact that he was dead was just about the only thing the cops and paramedics got right in this case. That's right, friends, incompetence rears its ugly head again, and the whole debacle is one of the worst examples I think I've ever seen. Well, he's getting an autopsy now, and then they're going to notice that he has been very violated. First of all, Anthony's underwear was inside out and backwards, and he clearly had trauma to his arms and rear ends, yet the police said nothing was suspicious about his condition. Hell, they even did a R-word kit on the boy, but I suppose it's proper procedure these days not to submit it to evidence or for testing. Even when his family asked for further investigation, they were simply told nothing was suspicious, that it was being ruled an overdose, even after being told repeatedly that Anthony wasn't an addict. I mean, to be fair, that should be taken with some degree of skepticism from a family, because, if they don't know, they don't know. This whole thing was deemed so not suspicious that the homicide detectives actively dismissed the case and refused to get involved, stating nothing within the evidence was strong enough to warrant their investigation. Not even an autopsy? No autopsy? Did we have an autopsy? Seems so suspicious. Why is there no autopsy? When someone young like this dies of something, they autopsy them, no? But Anthony's friends informed the cops that he'd been planning to meet up with a man named Stephen Port, and so he was arrested on June the 26th. The police also confiscated his laptop and took a sample of his DNA. Well, I feel like that's going to cook you, dude, because you just violated him. During the interview, Port even admitted to having known Anthony and that he had been in his flat. He told the cops that they'd spent some time together, but Port claimed to have left Anthony alone in his flat in order to go to work and that the boy had taken the drugs on his own while Port was away. He'd come home and thought that Anthony was asleep, but had actually OD'd and passed away from it. Not wanting any trouble, he'd carried the body out and left it in front of his building before calling the cops. It's not a bad fallback position, I have to say. And all of that sounds quite suspicious and far-fetched, yes? I mean, sort of. But also, all you gotta do is get reasonable doubt. And this is, it's not bad. I don't think it's the worst plan ever. Well, if you think that too, then you're clearly far smarter than the officers who interviewed Port. They didn't investigate the matter any further, though they did charge him for tampering with a dead body and the scene of death. They didn't even take into account that at least 11 men had reported that Port was a potential sex offender, since they didn't think it important to the case, nor did they investigate his search history even after they'd confiscated his laptop, completely missing the numerous date R-word porn videos stored on it. Ugh. The reason? It was too expensive and time-consuming. They didn't even search his phone records. Infuriating is not a strong enough word. Thanks to the police's lackluster approach to investigating a possible assault and murder, Port managed to make bail and walked out of jail, no fuss, no muss, ready to continue his search for companionship. When Sarah Sack talks about her son, it's clear that she's still heartbroken. I mean, of course she is. I don't think you're ever not heartbroken. I can't imagine this. I'm just immediately ready to move on. For the last 7 years, every time I talk about my son, I call him Anthony. I never ever called him that. It was always Ant. But I still can't bring myself to call him that, as it is so personal. And to me, it would mean my boy is really gone forever. I now realize forever is a long, long time. In the days and weeks following the death of Anthony, Port wasted no time at all searching for love once more, and sadly he found it. Gabriel Kovari was a 22-year-old man who had just recently moved from Slovakia to London when he fell into the clutches of Stephen Port. Port saw someone new in the area, someone in need of a friend, someone he could attach to and manipulate as he pleased, and so Port and Gabriel quickly became friends and soon after began to see each other romantically, to the point that Gabriel actually moved into Port's flat on August the 23rd, 2014. Port's neighbor Ryan Edwards thought that Gabriel was a great kid, but explains that their relationship was rocky from the start. Quote, "He seemed like a very nice guy, very articulate, intelligent, well-spoken, who had a passion for art, and he was very much an aspiring artist. So Stephen brings him over, and then Stephen goes to the toilet. Gabriel insists to me in sort of hushed tones, 'Ryan, Stephen is not the man you think he is. He is a bad man.' And it didn't take me long to realize that Gabriel was not happy living with Stephen." Yeah, no shit. You'd be like, what? That's a shiver down your spine, get the fuck out of there moment. It turns out the Port had been abusive and domineering to Gabriel from the start, perhaps even more so than many of the other partners he'd had in the past. Why? Well, because frankly, Gabriel was everything Stephen Port wasn't. He was kind, smart, attractive, talented, and he had goals, aspirations for his future, things he wanted to accomplish in life. All while Port was stuck in an infinite rut in his 30s, life going nowhere. He couldn't stand it, especially when Gabriel started to make friends with people Port knew, and perhaps that's why, less than a week after he'd moved in, Gabriel stopped replying to their calls and text messages. Everyone whom Gabriel would have been talking to, his friends, his family, none of them had heard from him. Ryan, who had gotten to be friends with Gabriel in the few days they'd known each other, approached Port about Gabriel's whereabouts. Port claimed to not know anything about it, and that he had no clue where Gabriel was, even though they were living together. But even then, the idiot couldn't stick to one story. He said that Gabriel actually run off with some guy from the army, that had fallen head over heels for this random stranger, and just popped off with him to God knows where. Again, nobody accused Stephen Port of being smart. However, things took a rather morbid turn when Port sent this very ominous text to Ryan. "I've got some really sad news, but I've heard from Gabriel's friends that he's gone back home, and he picked up a mysterious illness and has died." I mean, I'm sorry, but what? Suspicious isn't even half of how that message sounds. It's almost like something a small child would try to say to cover up having done something they know will upset their parents. Right now, my son who's 3, I'm like, "Remus, did you spill all of this water on the floor?" And he's like, "No." And I'm like, "Well, there's no one else around, Remus." And he's like, "The bad guys did it." I'm like, "Are you the bad guys, Remus?" And he's like, "No, maybe." Sadly, though, it would turn out that the final words of the message would end up being reality. It was August the 28th, 2014, only 5 days after Gabriel had moved into the flat on Cook Street, when the police were called once more. A dog walker was out, strolling by the graveyard of St. Margaret's Church in Barking, when her eyes landed on a rather horrid sight: the body of a young man propped up against a wall. This was, of course, Gabriel Kovari, and you can guess what was found in his pocket. And if he said drugs, namely GHB, ding ding ding, you're a winner. Just like Anthony, Stephen Porter drugged Gabriel, assaulted him, watched as he died before his eyes, and then proceeded to dump the body in a nearby area, this time the cemetery, nabbing his phone in the process. I read the next line already before I read it to you. And the cops did absolutely nothing. Nothing was taken off the body, no samples, no clothing, nothing. They simply found the bottle of drugs, chalked it up to an overdose, and went on their way. Even when a family friend by the name of John Pape and Gabriel's own boyfriend back home in Spain, Thierry Amodio, came to the police with evidence and concerns, they were simply ignored. What sort of evidence, you ask? The fact that another friend, Carl Camden, had sent pictures of the inside of Stephen Port's flat, saying that this was the place that Gabriel was living, address and all. Again, the police ignored them and sent them away. To them, Gabriel was just another gay drug user who was now litter on their streets. Nothing more than that, really. It was even stated that one detective, Sergeant Peter Sweetman, believed that he was an addict simply because of his somewhat skinny appearance. It's sad. What's even more sad is the fact that an officer was tasked with getting in touch with Gabriel's family to inform them of the news, and he simply didn't. In the words of John Pape, the only thing that makes sense about how disturbingly incompetent this investigation was is prejudice. Yep, completely agree. When Gabriel's brother was asked for comments on his fate, he had this to say: Gabriel was exceptional and ambitious, and I'm sure he would be leading an amazing life today if he had a chance. He made a mistake of trusting people too much. This cost him his life. It shouldn't have. Had the police done their job, my brother could still be here. Losing him was the single hardest thing for me and our family. Then, less than a month later, another life was lost. 21-year-old Daniel Whitworth was a chef who lived in Gravesend in Kent. It's near to where I grew up. Beloved by his family, as well as his longtime boyfriend Ricky Wormsley, he was skilled, successful, happy. But he also still spoke to people on those online dating sites. Maybe not for full-on hookups, as he was in a loving relationship, but people also use those sites to make connections and make friends. Perhaps that's what he felt he was in for when he was contacted by Stephen Port. It was September the 18th, 2014, when Port reached out, saying he wanted to meet up. Daniel said yes, and that he was looking forward to meeting him in person. 2 days later, he was dead. On September the 20th, coincidentally, the exact same dog walker who found Gabriel was walking by the exact same graveyard. She undoubtedly was still a bit shaken by her first find weeks ago, but she continued on with her life as usual, keeping up the routine. But that day, when gazing into the grove of tombstones, it happened again. The body of Daniel Whitworth was propped up against the same wall in the exact same spot as Gabriel, and he was long dead. She called the police. I was the same woman that found the other body a few weeks ago. I found another young boy. There's a couple of things here. One, I'd be very nervous about being that woman. It's like, I found another body. I didn't do it. I know it's a coincidence. I'm probably going to get arrested, but it wasn't me. Even if you're in that position, talk to a lawyer. It's just always worth having a lawyer. Oh my God. Also, I mean, humans are creatures that have it, right? The woman's going to walk her dog the same way. Body's going to be disposed of in the same way. You know, one is idiotic. One is just taking a nice walk. Having drawn Daniel to the flat, I'm having the double glazing in my office put in. We didn't have double glazing in the new office, and obviously it's better for sound. But right now, I have just one layer of glass. Normally there's 2 windows. The reason I'm talking about this, I don't know if you heard it, there was a very loud dog barking outside. But normally there's 2 layers of glass, like, you know, these old buildings, they have like 2 windows that open through each other. And one of those has been taken away to have like sound isolating double glazing in. But right now, it's very noisy because there's only one tiny pane of glass between me and the street, and the dogs, and the cars, and the trash truck, which I swear comes somehow every day. Having drawn Daniel to the flat, Port had wasted no time. Overpowering and drugging the boy, he violated him just as he had Anthony and Gabriel. Stephen Port had done it again, stolen the life of a young man who'd done nothing to deserve it. And as he watched Daniel die before his eyes, he cooked up a plan. You see, drugs weren't the only thing the police found on Daniel's person. They also found what appeared to be a rather hastily written note, one where Daniel took responsibility for murdering Gabriel, saying he had taken his own life from the guilt of it all. It was meant as a confession, a note explaining why he took his own life, but instead of being addressed to his family or friends or even his boyfriend, the slapdash excuse of a letter was clearly written for someone else, like, say, the cops. This is really dim. This is not the smartest plan. Also, this is the past. People would write stuff by hand all the time, and this must have been written by hand. The police are going to look at it and be like, no. Like, I don't believe handwriting analysis is like a real thing, right? I think that's another one of those things that's just been debunked. But you could be like, yes, no, quite clearly different people. And on top of that, as if he couldn't help himself, Port simply had to throw in this, quote, by the way, please do not blame the guy I was with last night. We only had sex, then I left. He knows nothing of what I have done. This is like you've spray painted your name on the wall in full along with your address and be like, no, it wasn't me. I didn't do that graffiti. Reminds me of a time. There was a kid at my school who engraved his full name in a desk in art class. We were doing like, you know, those lino cuts where you engrave like a piece of linoleum and then you take a print from it. And he'd just taken that tool and just engraved his name in the desk. And the teacher was like, did you do this? And he was like, no. It's like, well, it's your desk and it's your bloody name. Stupidity really is the name of the game. Oh, with Stephen Port. Someone with working brain cells wouldn't feel the need to put that into a supposed self-deletion note of a young man confessing to murder. Why would it matter? Why would it be important? All it would do is shine a big, bright spotlight onto the matter, putting suspicion on him instantly. Even the prosecution said as much in the later trial. Quote, "Why would you bother in a self-deletion note to point out something that is irrelevant? It's ridiculous. It should have immediately rung alarm bells, and that would be the first person that I would want to look at, having read this note." Indeed. Though perhaps he was starting to feel more and more invincible with each failed investigation, and this was no different. It's not your invincibility, mate. It's just generally the police being, busy and just a bit shit often. Another suspicious death, sure, but it's self-explanatory, right? A gay kid offed himself by taking an overdose of drugs and just happens to do it in the exact same location as the other guy. The case practically solves itself. Even when his family said it made no sense and the letter didn't sound like Daniel, even when there was no evidence at all proving that he and Gabriel knew each other, that didn't matter. And the police just brushed it under the rug. Fantastic work there, cops. Brilliant. Excellent. Good stuff. According to Daniel's boyfriend Ricky, quote, "They dismissed me in every single way. I believe, and I stand by it, it was because we were a gay, unmarried couple." Yep, I completely believe that. I don't think that's thinking that you're oppressed when you're not oppressed. I fully think that's exactly what's going on here. It's just the police give less of a shit because they're prejudiced. Remember, this is when? The 90s? The 80s? No. Oh no, this is this is recent. That's depressingly recent. I was recording an episode before this that was set earlier. Occurred earlier. These are real crimes, not fiction, Simon. Jesus. I still believe that is what happens. Just because it's not the 80s. There's still tons of prejudice. The next incident wouldn't come until a whole year had passed. Now you're probably wondering, a whole year? How could that be? He killed his first 3 victims in such a short amount of time. And in that, you'd be correct. But there's a reason. Remember, Port was only out on bail for the moving of Anthony's body, and so there had to be a trial. It was a short one, as Port ended up simply pleading guilty to perverting the course of justice on March the 23rd, 2015. He was sentenced to 8 months behind bars, but in a classic bit of Port luck, he only served 2 of them before being released completely on June the 4th, 2015. With that, he was a free man. That's pretty wild, dude. You got 2 months in prison. You moved a dead body and set it up somewhere. When asked by his friend Ryan as to why he was sent to prison, Port was rather flippant about it, saying he'd lost months of his life on what he called a 90-second mistake. I mean, sure, but stabbing someone is less than a 90-second mistake. It's like, it doesn't matter how long the mistake was, it matters how severe. That wouldn't stop him from making another, though, because before long he got in contact with another young man. This was 25-year-old Jack Taylor, a local forklift worker. Sadly, the 4th verse is the same as the first. Port reached out to Jack online, inviting him for fun times in his flat. Jack accepted, arrived on September the 13th, 2015, and was soon drugged, violated, and left to die. The next day, Port did something actually smart, deleting all of his dating site accounts, something he probably should have done long ago before lugging Jack to the exact same graveyard he'd dumped Gabriel and Daniel in, leaving him to be found later with a bottle of GHB, a tourniquet, and some medical wipes in his pocket. This is, I don't think, if you just go on, it's like, I don't know dating apps, but I have ChatGPT. If I just go onto ChatGPT and delete my accounts, I don't think that's deleting, I don't think OpenAI are deleting every conversation that I've ever had with them. I think you have to request that. And back in 2015, was there that law about I think it's a European law about the right to be forgotten, where you can request that they do delete all data related to you because it's kind of technically your data or it's information about you, and you can demand that they delete it. I don't think that's just, I don't think that was a thing back then. So if they do subpoena, what was it called? Grindr, then they're going to find that. After his body was discovered, Jack's family was devastated, and his sisters would explain that, quoting them, "He always lit up a room with his warm nature and always had a big cheesy smile on his face. Our whole world's been shattered into pieces. Our family is a big hole, and we are all so broken without him. We love him so very much. We always have, and we always will." And just like the previous 3, the police didn't waste any time investigating his death. Jack was just another hopeless homosexual who got hooked on drugs and ended up ODing in the boneyard. Apparently, they didn't find it suspicious at all that this one particular cemetery seemed like a popular place for young gay men to just shoot up and die. I don't think you shoot up GHB, do you? It's a liquid because people use it. It's a date drug. You put it in a drink, right? So they're like, you audience member. No. I mean, like, you predator. Not odd at all, and definitely not worth investigating. And of course, the fact that his sisters repeatedly told the authorities that Jack was as drug-free as it comes didn't mean all that much either. Can't blame them for that one, though, because people have secret drug habits. It's a thing. Thankfully, things would quickly come crashing down for Stephen Port, and justice would finally be served. Excellent. Let's get into that. The fun part of today's episode, where he goes to prison forever and hopefully has a miserable-ass time in there. Exposed and guilty. So I think it's safe to say that we all love it when we come across a story on this channel that has the one cop, the one police officer, the one that actually does their job well. Yes, we do, Matt. The one who's put on the case or even stumbles upon it and decides to take the bull by the horns. In this case, that just happened to be Police Constable John Taylor. You see, PC John Taylor hadn't been involved with any of the previous cases, but he was the first on the scene after Jack's body was discovered. The whole scene clearly didn't sit right with him, because 10 days later he arrived at the home of Jack's family. He wanted to get a better grasp on the situation, and he wanted to know more about Jack. His family told him everything, that Jack was a good kid, that he was scared of the dark, and he wouldn't even have any business being in Barking. And again, they reaffirmed that Jack hated drugs and would never take them willingly, so the idea that he'd OD'd made no sense at all. That was not like him. PC Taylor agreed and decided to do what many of his colleagues refused to do. Oh, some good old-fashioned police work. Going around and talking to everybody who had last seen Jack alive, PC Taylor and Jack Taylor's family, oh look, they've got the same surname, ended up at the Barking train station. There, they asked to see the CCTV footage of the night that Jack was last seen, and thankfully the station still had it. There was Jack Taylor, alive and well on the tape, walking right outside the station, right in front of the camera. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a man with blonde hair, wearing a dark jacket, a white shirt underneath, dark pants and sneakers. Dude, this is definitely, they're going to be like, that's the guy. That's the guy who he told us not to worry about. From there, things moved quickly, as they should have long ago. With the CCTV footage as evidence, the police went to the public asking for any information on the man in the footage. It didn't take long for his identity to be revealed, and wonder of wonders, it was someone the police were quite familiar with. He'd been with and moved the first victim. He lived close by the cemetery where 3 of them had been dumped. He lived with the second victim in his flat for several days, and the police finally took notice of all the sexual assault complaints about him from years prior. This guy couldn't look more guilty if he fucking tried. Actual police work at long last. All it took was 4 dead men and a determined officer to get the wheels turning. And so, after a year of nothing, on October the 15th, 2015, Stephen Port was finally brought in for questioning. Colin Taylor, Jack's dad, commented at the inquest, saying that he was relieved that the murderer was finally caught, but he was also angry that perhaps his boy could have been saved had the police done their jobs. Indeed. Quoting him, "We think because the police treated Jack as a drug addict, the police didn't look any further. If they'd done something from the start, Port could have been stopped. If the police had listened to all those people from the first murder, this would not have happened. They should have listened. Just listened to people." When the police finally got around to interrogating him, Port did all he could to appear intelligent and innocent, doing his best to speak well and keep his composure. If you're dumb, it's quite hard to look intelligent. Just like whereas if you're intelligent, it's easy to look dumb, right? I feel like it's quite hard to fake being smart. Although they do say just keep your mouth shut. Just listen. If you want people to think you're smart, just don't talk that much. Just sit and listen and occasionally make a comment. Even if just in your mind it's like boop, 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 boop. People will think you're deep in thought about what they're talking about. Often, my mind's because I'm not particularly smart. Sometimes when I'm reading a script. However, under pressure, Port admitted that he had known Daniel Whitworth, that the two of them had met each other at a sex party. That was the extent of it, though, since according to Port, he'd been totally oblivious that the young man was dead. Outside of that, he refused to take responsibility for any of the deaths and claimed that he'd never drugged anyone. Sure, Stephen. And I'm divine. The police weren't buying any of that, though, as they had all they needed even without a confession. They had managed to link him to every single victim through footage and messages dug out from his phone and laptop. And speaking of his laptop, when it was examined, they finally found all that date R-word porn, along with videos of Port himself having sex with several unconscious young men. Ugh. And so, on the 18th of October 2015, 41-year-old Stephen Port was arrested, charged with 4 counts of murder and 4 counts of administering poison. I don't understand how you can be so dumb as to be like, oh no, I'll delete my Grindr account, but I won't wipe my hard drive that is filled with tons of incriminating evidence. Or, I don't know, at least fucking encrypt it, dude. What's wrong with you? His trial didn't get underway until June of 2016, with Port being housed at HM Prison Belmarsh while he waited, stewing on what he'd done. Once proceedings began at the Old Bailey, the prosecution wasted no time in adding even more charges to the bill, including 6 more counts of administering a poison, 8 charges of R-word between 2011 and 2015, 4 of sexual assault, as well as 4 alternative charges of manslaughter. Port, of course, denied all of it, appearing in court via video call. Is it common for people to just do video calls into court rather than go there? It's interesting.
So maybe I don't understand something. This is a driving while license suspended?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And he was just driving.
For weeks, every piece of the 4 cases, as well as every bit of information stripped from his laptop and phone, were presented to the court. Every evil he ever did, every dark transgression, was all brought into the light, and there wasn't anything he could do to defend himself. The DNA didn't lie, as the semen had been found on Gabriel's sunglasses and Daniel's clothing, and his handwriting was quickly found to be identical to that of the faux suicide letter left at Daniel's body. Dude, I mean, you didn't even disguise your own handwriting? What is wrong with you? How can you be so dim? And in the same vein, the prejudicial and downright embarrassing job of the police was also uncovered. They did their best to try and hide it. Even the coroner said that they didn't think any homophobic intent played a part in the investigation, but no matter their efforts, they were caught and they were called out, and they ended up looking foolish in the aftermath of the trial. To quote a member of the jury, "We believe there were fundamental failures in these investigations, which were at a basic level." After the trial, a press conference was held, and I think Neil Hudgens, the lawyer representing the families of the victims, put it rather poignantly, quoting, "We are incensed by the police's successful efforts to prevent the jury from examining whether prejudice played any part in the police's actions. The coroner did not rule that the police were not homophobic, and our position remains unchanged. Based on the treatment we received, our firmly held belief is that the Metropolitan Police's actions were, in part, driven by homophobia. Had 4 white, heterosexual girls been found dead in the same manner as Anthony, Gabriel, Daniel, and Jack, then the police's actions and the likely outcomes would have been different." Completely agree, but also the police are not the ones on trial here. I feel like there is definitely, or in my opinion, some sort of action that could be taken against or should be taken against the police here, whether internally or externally. But that's not what this trial's about, really, is it? In the end, the truth thankfully won out. On November the 23rd, 2016, Stephen Port was found guilty of all 4 murders, assault by penetration, and the sexual assault of Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Kovari, Daniel Whitworth, and Jack Taylor. In addition, he was also found guilty of the sexual assaults of 3 other men he drugged, 10 counts of administering a substance with intent, and 4 sexual assaults. With the verdict of guilty came a sense of relief and validation for all the family members of the 4 men who'd been lost to this monster. I believe Sarah Seck said it perfectly. For the jury to come back and say how they messed up Anthony's investigation, and had they done it right, it would have saved the other 3 boys, I think that will be for us a massive victory. It will prove we were right all this time. On November the 25th, 2016, Stephen Port was given his sentence, and it was one that he fully deserved. Death. That's what he deserves, but it's not what he's going to get, because we don't have death penalty in the UK. 10 years ago? Alas. Mr. Justice Openshaw took no mercy or pity on him, sentencing him with prejudice to a whole life tariff. Currently 50 years old, Port will never see the outside of a prison again. No, whole life tariffs are very rare in the UK. They're reserved for very, very serious crimes. It's basically life without parole. And yeah, well fucking deserved. After everything was said and done, a full review of all the cases was conducted. And to say they were found to be lacking, well, that's an understatement. Met Police Deputy Assistant Commissioner Stuart Cundy went on record to say how astonished and ashamed he was that the investigations were not properly handled. And in regards to the victims' families, he issued a personal and public apology. "I can't imagine putting myself in your shoes. I am deeply sorry, personally and on the behalf of the Metropolitan Police Service, that we didn't conduct the initial investigations to the standard you expected and the standard you deserved." That's a good apology. I'd like to see it come from not the boss, though, but from the people who were actually They're not doing their jobs. Anyway. Wrap up. And there you have it. The end of our tale. Frustrating is not a strong enough word. Laughable either. Stephen Port was selfish and only thought of himself and his own precious needs. He wanted someone to play out his sexual fantasies for him, someone who he could manipulate and control to his heart's content. He used and abused several men, and then Anthony died. He could have stopped there, he could have turned himself in, and yet he didn't. He simply kept going, now having a taste for murder in conjunction with his own sick pleasures. And in doing so, 4 young men, bright and innocent, lost their lives, and what did he do? He simply threw them away like garbage, doing all he could to feign innocence, all so that he could continue to live his life, look for love, and play with toys, all while wearing this god-awful hairpiece that wasn't fooling a soul. Thankfully, now he's where he belongs, behind bars for the rest of his natural life, where he can rot away all of his remaining days, plagued by the evil of his own mind and tortured by the consequences of his own actions. I don't know if these fucking sickos like this, whether they have this kind of regret, but just for me, knowing that they're having a miserable last time in prison, that's enough. I don't expect people like this to feel regret. I don't expect them to feel much at all, to be honest. I think Sarah Sack summed it up to a T. She said, "I was surprised what an ugly person he is, and I think the only way that he could get these young, attractive boys was to drug them, because nobody would have looked at him twice. He was a very ugly person, inside and out, and a sad, lonely, bald old man, and I don't think he's very bright, and he literally thought he was God, that he could just get away with it." End quote. And the police were utterly useless, of course. To them, these were simply a handful of gay men who OD'd, no big loss. And with each blunder, another victim surfaced, only to be passed over thanks to laziness and prejudice. Hell, things about the investigation are still being looked into to this day. Wow, it's almost a decade later. With up to 17 current and former officers coming under the microscope for their actions and inactions in regards to the Port case. To quote Donna Taylor, Jack Taylor's sister, "Every one of the boys was not treated like individual humans, and we have to say they were discriminated against from the very beginning. The way they were seen as druggies, homeless, gay, it's not acceptable. Regardless of what you are in this world, you should be treated as an individual." End quote. Stephen Port has become infamous in the UK for the evil things he did, taking advantage of those in need, those who were searching for something special. The folks of the LGBT community have always had it tough, going through many hardships, many trials and tribulations, simply for existing and trying to live their lives. And this is just one of the more prominent examples in the last 10 years of an individual from within becoming a monster while claiming to be on a mission to find his own version of happiness. He's no Jeffrey Dahmer, but his crimes are their own twisted version of desperate evil. I'll say this though, if this is an indicator of the kind of guys who hang out on Grindr, I think I'll be staying single, thank you very much. With that said, as we close the book on this story, let's remember the victims, as we always try to do. These men didn't ask for this. Whether they themselves were looking for love, were in search of a friend, or if it was part of a job, each of them ended up in the grasp of a predator, and all paid the ultimate price because of it. Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Kovari, Daniel Whitworth, Jack Taylor, and all the other unnamed victims who, while they lived, had a peace taken away from them at the hands of a monster. I truly hope peace found you all in some way, especially now that the man who violated you has been brought to justice for his actions. And that's where we end the video today. Thanks for being here.